nonfiction. Nonfiction, what some people refer to as the boring writing, because it is real and it is limited by reality. Everything in nonfiction is presented as fact, as truth. Typically, we assume that whoever is composing the nonfiction believes it to be truthful. Doesn't necessarily mean it is 100% truthful, but we have many types of nonfiction: autobiographies, biographies, essays, reports, letters, memos, and newspaper articles. So, I even highlighted some stuff for you so that you know the important things. Real nonfiction is real. It is not fake. The author of nonfiction is always a real person. Your narrator is a real person. That's not always the case in fiction. The audience and purpose influence the type of information that a writer chooses to include in their nonfiction. We again have a certain tone. So if you remember, the tone is the author's feelings towards the subject or towards the reader. And that is, just as with fiction, displayed in writers' word choice and style. Now, style is something you may not have talked about very often, but style is actually the way that I most often catch plagiarism in my class, because each of you has a particular style, because each of you has a particular personality. So once I get a sense of what your style is, if you turn in something that does not fit that style, it kind of makes me go, So factors that contribute to your style is: how formal do you write? Do you tend to use a lot of figurative language? What kind of word choice or sentence patterns do you tend to use in your writing? Those are all things that give a writer a certain kind of voice. Let's see, we've already talked about tone. Perspective is important in nonfiction. We want to know what perspective, what opinion the author is expressing about a subject, because sometimes, and you'll see this a lot this fall, once politics really gets going here for the election, sometimes we see bias in nonfiction writing. So I said that everything in nonfiction is real and it's true, but it doesn't mean it's the whole truth. So this fall, as we gear up for Trump versus Biden, you'll see a lot of writers, newspaper writers, who are trying to express the truth, but they're doing so in a biased way. So if they support President Trump, then maybe they leave out information that would be damaging or hurtful to him. So they're presenting the truth, but they're not presenting the whole truth, and vice versa, of course. Okay, purpose. Purpose is the author's reason for writing. So maybe your reason is to inform people about particular information, to persuade someone, to honor, to entertain, to explain, to warn. Probably a lot of warnings in the political writings this semester, I'm sure. So there's 4 main types of nonfiction, and I've only highlighted 3 of them because those are the 3 main types that we will be dealing with. You'll be writing me some full examples of narrative nonfiction and persuasive nonfiction. We'll address informational nonfiction in our literary analysis that we do for tests and things like that. Descriptive nonfiction, I don't know that it works very well by itself. Its purpose is just to describe. And I think really good description probably belongs in these other types of writing, particularly in narrative writing, where you're trying to tell a story. You want to have good description in a story. So that's why we won't deal with that one by itself. Now I have an example of narrative writing for you here. And before you get discouraged and say, reading, the torment, this particular narrative diary entry is about drugs. So, tried to give you something interesting, hopefully something that is not at all relatable. And you can, hopefully, through this girl's writing, understand from her description, what she felt and what she saw and what she went through when she had this drug experience, And, you will be able to relate to her experience without actually having to do drugs yourself. Don't do drugs. Drugs are bad. So, this is from a girl who grew up in the 1960s. If you know anything about the 60s, there's a lot of kind of counterculture, the quote unquote hippie movement going on, more experimentation with mind altering substances. So, she was only 15 the first time that she was given drugs. And the drug that she was dosed with in this diary entry was LSD, which is a very, very serious drug that can cause serious hallucinations, of which she has quite a bit. So I'm going to read her diary entry, and then we can talk about some of the description that she uses. I tried to bold sections that had particularly strong descriptions so that you can notice them as I read. So, her diary entry from July 10th. I don't know whether I should be ashamed or elated. I only know that last night I had the most incredible experience of my life. It sounds morbid when I put it into words, but actually it was tremendous and wonderful and miraculous. The kids at Jill's were so friendly and relaxed and at ease that I immediately felt at home with them. They accepted me like I had always been one of their crowd, and everyone seemed happy and unhurried. I loved the atmosphere. It was great, great, great. Anyway, a little while after we got there, Jill and one of the boys brought out a tray of Coca-Cola, and all the kids immediately sprawled out on the floor on cushions and curled up together on the sofa and chairs. Jill winked at me and said, "Tonight we're playing Button Button, Who's Got the Button? You know, the game we used to play when we were kids." Bill Thompson, who stretched out next to me, laughed. "Only it's just too bad that now somebody has to babysit." Everyone sipped their drinks slowly, and everyone seemed to be watching everyone else. Suddenly, I began to feel something strange inside myself, like a storm. I remember that 2 or 3 records had played since we had had the drinks, and now everyone was beginning to look at me. The palms of my hands were sweating, and I could feel droplets of moisture on my scalp at the back of my neck. The room seemed unusually quiet, and as Jill got up to close the window completely, I thought, "They're trying to poison me. Why? Why would they try to poison me?" My whole body was tense at every muscle, and a feeling of weird apprehension swept over me, strangled me, suffocated me. When I opened my eyes, I realized that it was just Bill, who had put his arm around my shoulder. "Lucky you," he was saying in a slow-motioned record on the wrong speed voice. "But don't worry, I'll babysit you. This will be a good trip. Come on, relax, enjoy it, enjoy it." He caressed my face and neck tenderly and said, "Honestly, I won't let anything bad happen to you." Suddenly, he seemed to be repeating himself over and over like a slow motion echo chamber. I started laughing wildly, hysterically. It struck me as the funniest, most absurd thing I had ever heard. Then I noticed the strange shifting patterns on the ceiling. Bill pulled me down and my head rested on his lap as I watched the pattern change to swirling colors, great fields of reds, blues, and yellows. I tried to share the beauty with the others, but my words came out soggy, wet, and dripping or tasting of color. I pulled myself up and began walking, feeling a slight chill which crept inside as well as outside my body. I wanted to tell Bill, but all I could do was laugh. Soon, whole trains of thought started to appear between each word. I had found the perfect and true and original language used by Adam and Eve, but when I tried to explain, the words I used had little to do with my thinking. I was losing it. It was slipping out of my grasp, this wonderful and priceless and true thing which must be saved for posterity. I felt terrible, and finally I couldn't talk at all and slumped back onto the floor, closed my eyes, and the music began to absorb me physically. I could smell it and touch it and feel it as well as hear it. Never had anything ever been so beautiful. I was a part of every single instrument, literally a part. Each note had a character, shape, and color all of its own, and seemed to be entirely separate from the rest of the score so that I could consider its relationship to the whole composition before the next note sounded. My mind possessed the wisdoms of the ages, and there were no words adequate to describe them. I looked at the magazine on the table, and I could see it in 100 dimensions. It was so beautiful I could not stand the sight of it and closed my eyes. Immediately, I was floating into another sphere, another world, another state. Things rushed away from me and at me, taking my breath away like a drop in a fast elevator. I couldn't tell what was real and what was unreal. Was I the table, or the book, or the music, or was I part of all of them? But it didn't really matter, for whatever I was wonderful. For the first time that I could remember in my whole life, I was completely uninhibited. I was dancing before the whole group, performing, showing off, and enjoying every second of it. My senses were so up that I could hear someone breathing in the house next door, and I could smell someone miles away making orange and red and green rib jello. After what seemed eternities, I began to come down and the party started breaking up. I sort of asked Jill what happened, and she said 10 out of the 14 bottles of Coke had LSD in them. Wow, am I glad I was one of the lucky ones. I drifted off into a seasick type of sleep, wrapped in a general sense of well being, except for a slight headache that probably was the result of long and intense laughing. It was fun, it was ecstatic, it was glorious. So I'm glad they did it to me, because now I can feel free and honest and virtuous about not having made the decision myself. All right, so this is an excerpt from a book called Go Ask Alice. It's a series of diary entries from this girl, Alice, this 15-year-old girl in the 1960s. Now, slight spoiler, I don't know if you're interested in reading the book, but this first drug experience, even though it was ecstatic and glorious, it does not stay that way. Things get very, very bad for Alice, and drugs are not her friend. So don't think that just because she had one nice time that I am in any way promoting drug experience. I am not. But even though I have never done LSD, I can definitely imagine the sensations from the way that she describes it. Hearing someone breathing in the house next door, I can never imagine thinking that I would be able to do that. Seeing a magazine in 100 dimensions, what does that even mean? Where she's talking about the music, how she could smell it and touch it and feel it. So all of these different descriptions give me, a person who cannot really truly relate to her experience, an idea of what it is like. And that's what you want to do for someone in a narrative, is give them a picture into your life, a vivid picture if you can, without them actually having lived your life. So on that note, your narrative. So this is your first official writing assignment. And I've asked you to choose a moment in your life of emotional power. So what I mean by that is, rather than just choosing any sort of generic memory, when I went to the beach last summer, I want you to choose a moment that specifically had some sort of emotion attached to it. It doesn't have to be, the entire time you're feeling the emotion, but at some point you feel intensely happy or sad or angry or embarrassed or whatever in that memory that you're trying to describe. Okay, goals is 1 to 2 double-spaced typed pages, which usually is fairly achievable. If you can't even get one page, then either we're lacking some serious detail in your memory or you chose a bad memory, and we need to rethink that. It'll be in MLA format. Most of this, some of this is set in Google Docs already. You'll have to change the font, but the margins are already set. You'll submit it just as normal. At the top, I would like you to do an MLA heading, which has your name, my name, Mrs. Blackburn, the class name, English 1, and then the date that the assignment is due. And that date is going to be October 5th. So your date, since it's written in day, month, year format, would actually be 5 October 2020. As far as how I'm going to be grading it, I do have quite a few grading areas for this, since it is your first really official writing assignment. So all of the mechanical areas, spelling, punctuation, grammar, that all matters. So try and use the things that we learned about in the grammar packet. As far as the quality of your memory, the figurative language score will communicate of what quality your description is as you're trying to describe your memory. And then other things to keep in mind are Sentence structure, varied syntax. Make sure you're using complete sentences. Avoid those run-ons and fragments. And then varied diction is your use of good vocabulary. We've had a set of vocabulary by now, so you are welcome to use words from our vocabulary that we learned together in class. But just try and avoid words like happy or sad. There are better words out there that can more precisely describe your feelings. So that is the assignment itself. And now I have some tips and some examples to try and help you out. So if narrative writing is a hard thing for you, if this is like the assignment that you dread each year is having to write a story about yourself, maybe there's a flaw with the way that you're doing it. And usually that has to do with showing rather than telling. You don't just want to tell your reader what happened, you want to be able to show them as much of the actual detail of that scene as possible. So what this document does is it takes samples of writing and it gives you kind of a bad, better, best version. So here is the really basic telling sentence. And then here is a much more detailed telling sentence. And then here is your best showing sentence, where you don't have to say the girl looked tired because we can see the tired. So let's see. I think my favorite one is this one about the dog. I usually get a few people each year who talk about, a beloved pet or animal who passed away, and they're trying to make me feel sad. If this is what you say about your animal to try to make me feel sad, it's going to fall a little short. I'll never forget how I felt after Fido died. I was miserable. Well, that's great, but I don't really feel much. You just telling me you were miserable, it doesn't show me what kind of effect this had on you. It doesn't show me anything about Fido. I need to know Fido a little bit to feel as upset as you did. So here is a better version. If I live for 1,000 years, I'll never forget how utterly and terribly alone I felt after Fido died. Months and months went by, and it seemed that every little thing reminded me of him. I don't know whether I am ever going to get over his death. So here, I have a much more vivid idea of how you feel, of how this person feels about losing Fido, the effect on them. But I'm still missing Fido from this. I'm still missing the doggy. So here is a showing version. Whenever puppies in the pet store window distracted me from our walk, Fido flattened his scruffy ears, growling, but he always forgave me. As his sight faded, the smell of fresh air and the feel of grass would make him try to caper. Eventually, at the sound of my voice, his tail thumped weakly on the ground. This morning, I filled his water bowl all the way to the top, just the way he likes it, before I remembered. So now we can see little Fido and his cute, charming scruffiness, and his illness, and the sadness that this person feels when they realize, oh God, he's gone. So that is a much more vivid way of trying to show your story. So lots more examples. I will not read all of them, but you are welcome to read as many as you need to kind of get the idea. Okay, the other thing that I have here are some narrative examples from previous students. And I have these on a slide sharing network because I put them into a slideshow. If for some reason this website will not load for you, please let me know. I've had some issues in the past with the school filter trying to block students from getting to SlideShare, which seems silly to me, but I'm not in charge of these things. So anyways, you can always see it on here, but if it does block you, please let me know so I can contact the technology department and yell at them. Okay, so narrative writing examples. First one is from a student I had named Brandon. So Brandon's narrative was a negative experience that he'd been through. So if you think that you may be writing about something on the negative side of things, then see how he develops this memory. It was a light-filled afternoon. The light's reflection from the window blinded my eyes, so I squinted one of my eyes just to see the teacher artistically write on the white board with a red marker. What number of people live in the USA? The teacher asked us to answer. Hands went flying in the air, waving back and forth like a swing, trying to get her attention. The answer is about 2 billion people living in the USA, the teacher said while going to get her math book to check our homework. Then Tyler, a blonde-headed kid who was short, raised his hand. He was one of the class clowns in the 8th grade, and he smiled like he was going to tell a hilarious joke and said, "What about the people with nubs and hands that don't work or people in wheelchairs? Do they count as half?" All of the students' laughter echoed in the classroom, bouncing around my head, laughing at my imperfection. I hid my right arm under the desk. The black phone rang for me to go to my dentist appointment, and as the kid beside of me was waiting to high-five me goodbye, I looked disgusted to him and said, "Why should I high-five you? You all think I'm half of a person." All of my classmates looked guilty and looked at the floor ashamed, and feeling angry and upset, I slammed the door so hard that it almost echoed down the locker-filled halls. The next day, all the classmates said they're sorry about the other day, and one of them said that they didn't mean that and they love me. But I don't know if I should believe him or not because I've been treated differently around other people as long as I can remember. I already had known they treat me different because when I'm talking to anyone, they don't make eye contact with me. Instead, they focus on my hand, trying to figure out how am I speaking their language so commonly as water flows through a river with a broken arm like mine. Am I just a handicapped toy buried at the cold, dark bottom by new perfect ones that don't make mistakes? My non-stop journey is trying to break through the top, being somebody that can make a difference in the world, but alas, they smack me down. And while I was falling off the endless mountain of toys, I asked myself, will this ever end? In the bed, where I do most of my thinking, I lay there motionless, pondering, and let all of my thoughts take over my mind. Why am I like this? What's my purpose in life? And why does everyone treat me like a handicapped person? I'm human too. Why me? Why? These thoughts and more have haunted my mind, never leaving my brain. I am a prisoner inside of my own mind. All right, so Brandon did have a disability as a result of a genetic condition that he had. So his experience about being bullied as a child was something that he wanted to show how he had been treated and mistreated by people around him who underestimated him. So next one, Carrie says, is a little bit more positive. It starts a little sad, but it ends happy. So if you think you might focus on a more happy memory, then this one may be good inspiration for you. I remember when I first saw her. She was holding the hand of her mother. She was putting one foot in front of the other, and then she made a little hop. Right foot in front and hop. Left foot in front and hop. I suppose it was skipping. She was rambling a sort of melody. Her mouth was pouring out words like a faucet would water. Her mother was being dragged along with her all the way to the door. My brother Nick and I sat there, mesmerized. Our eyes were glued onto her as if she were some magical creature we had never seen before. Nick stretched his arms out as far as they would go and groaned. He blinked his eyes. Then he rubbed the sand that had cemented his eyes together that night while he was sleeping. I wiped the salty droplets from my eyes while my mom unbuckled me slowly. Her eyes were red and puffy. She didn't hide the drenched tissue in her pocket very well. The day before, I had a visit with my dad. The experience was so odd. Tiny boxes on every corner of the walls. And these one-eyed goggles seemed to poke out of the tiny boxes to spy on our every move. That day with him had at first seemed better than any amount of chocolate, but that moment was soon crushed with the reality of reason. My dad was going away for a very long time. I snapped back into the world. Tears came rushing out as if clouds had taken the place of my eyes. My mom didn't notice. She wasn't all there, I guess. Nick was waiting with the teacher. My mom and I battled to get me inside. She opened the door to child time, and I cried like a baby, as if it were the end of the world. The teacher grabbed me. While she was holding me still, I watched as my mom walked, got in the car, and drove away. That day, I sat there alone at a table for what seemed like forever, thinking about if my dad would ever be back. In the middle of thinking, the magical creature I had seen skipping that morning walked up to me. She just stood there and smiled. I forced a smile back. She had seen right through it. Her facial expression changed and was then replaced with a pitiful puppy dog look, a look of concern perhaps. She seemed to shake it off fast, though, and asked me my name. Carissa, I whispered softly. She repeated it twice, nodded her head. Then she said, My name's Jasmine, Jasmine Lahara. My eyes stayed in her direction for the longest time. I admired the bright light that shone from her mouth, the peachy glow that her cheeks made, and the large gleaming stars that stared back into my soul. She twirled around like a ballerina and darted off like one would in a race with challenging opponents. She came back just as fast as she had gone. She was holding markers in one hand and paper in the other. You want a color? She asked gently. She had placed the paper in my hand before I could even reply and sat right beside me. She placed the markers between us and began to draw. She made this weird tune come out of her mouth, yet she didn't actually open her mouth. I looked at her with my eyes wide and my ears open, listening to her. I tried the tune out myself, but the feeling made me jump. I swallowed the horrible sound I had produced back inside me. I looked at my paper. I had no clue what to draw. I watched as Jasmine used all the markers. She seemed busy. She suddenly threw down her marker and screamed, Voila! I just glared at her with one eyebrow pointed up. I'm done, she proclaimed proudly. I smiled, but this time I smiled a real smile. Close your eyes. I closed them, but then tried to open them just enough to catch a glimpse. Hey, no peeking. I then shut my eyes tightly, bringing darkness to them. Open them. The light came in. What she was holding soon came into focus. She had held up a picture to show me. I stared at it and smiled. It had 2 stick girls and a heart in the middle with the letters BFFs on the side. The B was backwards, though. She grabbed me and wrapped her arms around me tightly and whispered, You're my best friend. So that was Carissa's story about meeting her best friend, who was her best friend throughout elementary school and middle school and high school and maybe even still today. Who knows? But those were some student narrative examples. So the only other thing that I have for you, and this is only if you are interested, is I have a narrative example from my life. So back when I was still Miss Vroom instead of Miss Blackburn, I wrote a narrative in college about experience from my life. So it's kind of long because, it was for college, so it goes on for a bit. But if you are interested in reading it to get, any additional examples of narratives, then it is there for you if you want it. So that is all we're talking about in class today, and any time that we have left will be for you guys to start your narratives.